The park was almost empty that morning, quiet and fog-kissed. Leaves rustled gently, the sun struggling through clouds like a half-hearted promise. David Sterling, billionaire tech mogul and the man who hated mornings, was walking alone for once. No assistant, no driver, no security detail. Just him and his thoughts, which lately had grown heavier than usual. He had everything, technically. Money, fame, the corner office of a skyscraper bearing his name. But at 41, David's life felt sterile. No one close, no warmth, just glass walls, cold contracts, and louder silences in an empty penthouse. He liked to escape to the park sometimes. It reminded him of the days when he had nothing but dreams and a cracked phone screen. He nearly missed her. Tucked beneath a dying tree, slumped against the bench, was a girl. No, a woman. Young, but not a teenager. Her head was tilted down. One arm draped limply over what he thought was a duffel bag. Except it wasn't. It was a child, a baby to be exact. And not just one, three. 3 babies bundled in thin blankets, one crying softly, the others too quiet to be normal. David's heart pounded as he rushed forward. "Hey!" he shouted, crouching down beside her. "Hey! Can you hear me?" No response. She was breathing barely, but cold to the touch. Her face was pale and her lips trembled even in sleep or unconsciousness. She looked like she hadn't eaten in days. He didn't hesitate. David scooped up one baby in his arms, then carefully pressed his hand to the woman's cheek. Her skin felt clammy. Not good. "God damn it," he muttered, reaching for his phone with shaking hands. But then he stopped. Something in him, something strange and wild, said no hospitals, not yet. Not until he knew what was happening. She looked scared, even in her faint. The babies were quiet now, but sickly, desperate. Were they hers? Abandoned, escaping something. David made a choice. He called someone else. "Peter," he barked into the phone. "Bring the car to the west side of Lincoln Park, now. And call Mia. Tell her to prep the guest wing." No questions. 15 minutes later, his black SUV pulled up, and his driver's eyes nearly fell out of his head at the sight. David didn't explain. He climbed in, carrying one baby himself, while Peter carefully helped with the others. The woman was limp, but still breathing. David didn't look back as the car sped away. Back at his mansion, a modern fortress of glass, steel, and untouchable wealth, chaos erupted the moment they arrived. Mia, his head of staff, met them at the door, trying not to show her shock. David just gave orders. "Get a doctor. Quiet one, no reports, no police. I want to know who she is, but not through the press." Mia nodded, already dialing. The woman was placed in one of the warmest guest rooms, and the babies, 1 girl, 2 boys, were cared for like royalty. David stood by the doorway, arms folded, face unreadable as the private doctor arrived and began examining them. "She's dehydrated," the doctor murmured. "Malnourished. She's been under extreme stress. The babies too, though luckily they seem stable now. Another day out there and—" She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. David sat by her bedside later that night watching her sleep. She looked younger now, fragile, haunted. "Who are you?" he whispered. There was no answer, just her shallow breaths and the faint stirring of the babies in the next room. David didn't sleep that night. Instead, he sat in the dark, watching. Over strangers he suddenly felt too responsible for. It was the first time in years he felt needed. Morning light poured through the tall windows of David's mansion, soft and golden. The kind of light people wrote poems about. But David Sterling wasn't thinking about poetry. He was standing at the nursery door. Yes, he had ordered a room converted overnight into one. His staff didn't ask questions anymore. The babies were cleaned, warm, fed, and finally sleeping. Mia stood beside him, arms crossed. "They're all underweight," she said softly. "But they'll recover with care. Whoever she is, she kept them alive." David nodded slowly, eyes on the smallest baby, the girl. She had cried the most last night, her cries ragged like her little lungs had run out of sound. "Any ID?" Mia shook her head. "No wallet. Just a broken phone with a shattered screen and some loose change in her pocket." David's jaw clenched. "And her name?" "She hasn't woken up yet. Doctor says maybe today." He walked away from the nursery, pacing through the mansion halls, his mind full of questions. Who walks into a park with 3 babies and no supplies, no food, no diapers? Who collapses on a bench like they've given up? And what was she running from? By noon she stirred. David had been sitting nearby, silent, waiting. The doctor had left an hour ago, but Mia remained just outside the room in case she panicked. Her eyelids fluttered. She sat up slowly, blinking at the tall ceilings, the silk sheets, the warmth, and then her body stiffened. Where are they? Her voice cracked as she threw the covers off. My babies, where are they? David was already on his feet. They're safe. They're okay. You're in a safe place. She backed into the headboard, eyes wide with terror. Who are you? What is this? I'm David, he said calmly. I found you in the park. You fainted. The babies were cold. One wasn't breathing right. I brought you here, to my home. She stared at him, her chest rising and falling quickly. Your babies are fine, he added. Would you like to see them? She nodded slowly, tears pooling in her eyes. He led her carefully down the hallway, not touching her, just walking, beside her like a quiet shield. When they reached the nursery, she rushed inside. The babies were in tiny bassinets, clean, sleeping, breathing. She collapsed to her knees and sobbed. David didn't say a word. He waited until her sobs turned to sniffles and silence. After a while, she turned her face to him, eyes swollen but steady. My name's Lila, she said hoarsely. Lila Grant. He nodded. Nice to meet you, Lila. They're mine, she added, as if afraid he might think otherwise. My babies, triplets, 2 boys, Liam and Noah, and Grace. They're just 9 months. He sat in the chair beside the doorway, watching her. What happened, Lila? She wiped her face with her sleeve, then looked at the babies again before answering. I had nowhere to go. Their father left before they were born. Said triplets weren't part of the plan. I lost my job 2 months ago. Rent came due. The shelter was full. Food ran out. I thought I could make it just 1 more night. Her voice cracked again. I didn't plan to collapse, she whispered. I just didn't have the strength to keep walking. David felt something heavy settle in his chest. He was a man used to numbers, stocks, and negotiations. But this was raw survival, not statistics, not a charity case. A woman with 3 babies and no one in the world to call. You saved them, he said softly. You kept them alive. You did everything you could. She looked up, shocked by the kindness in his tone. No one said that to me, she murmured. Not once. David stood slowly. You'll stay here as long as you need. Her mouth opened, then closed again. I can't pay you. I didn't ask for that. But why would you help me? She asked, suspicion flickering in her tone now. You don't know me. He paused in the doorway. Because I know what it's like to be abandoned. Then he left her in the nursery, knowing full well he'd just let a stranger and 3 babies into the most guarded part of his life and heart. Lila didn't sleep much that night. Even though the bed was softer than anything she'd ever felt, and the room smelled faintly of lavender, she kept waking up. Each time she stirred, she sat up quickly and listened, waiting to hear one of the babies cry, waiting to hear the crash of the world falling apart again. But the mansion was quiet. Too quiet. By morning, she was already dressed. Well, dressed as much as she could be in the clean clothes one of the staff had left on the chair. A soft sweater, leggings and slippers. Far better than the threadbare hoodie and jeans she had been wearing for weeks. She walked down the hallway slowly, unsure of where she was going, feeling like a ghost in a place too big to belong to her. The walls were lined with art and silence. She found the nursery on her own and smiled when she saw Mia holding one of the babies, bouncing him gently. Oh, you're up, Mia said, smiling. How you should be resting. I've done enough of that, Lila replied with a weak smile. Can I take him? Of course. Mia handed the baby to her and lowered her voice. He likes to be held close. He's got a strong grip, that one. Lila nodded, tears forming again as she hugged her son. Thank you. Mia glanced at her, something motherly in her eyes. David meant what he said, you know. You're safe here. Lila didn't respond. She wasn't ready to believe in safe yet. Later that day, David returned from wherever Billionaires go on a weekday. A black car rolled through the gates, and Lila watched him from a second-story window as he stepped out with his suit slightly wrinkled, tie loosened, and a face weighed down by whatever burdens he carried. She expected him to go straight to some office in the house. He didn't. Instead, he walked toward the backyard and sat near the pond, rolling up his sleeves and removing his shoes. For 20 minutes, he just sat there, feet in the water, head back. It was strange seeing a man like him, richer than kings, look so tired. That afternoon, they finally talked again. Lila was in the kitchen making bottles when David walked in, sleeves still rolled up, hair tousled. "You're up early," he said casually, pulling out a chair. She didn't turn around. "I never really sleep deep. Not since I had them." David nodded, eyes scanning the room like he wasn't used to seeing it lived in. "I hope my staff hasn't overwhelmed you," he added. "No, they've been kind. Too kind." He picked up a baby rattle from the counter and studied it. "I bought this place 10 years ago. It's never had children in it or a real family." She glanced at him, brow furrowed. "Why not?" He shrugged. "I guess I never made time for it. Or didn't want to," she said quietly, not accusing, just observing. He smiled, the first real one she'd seen on his face. "You're sharp." "I had to be." A long silence passed. David stood. "Lila, you don't have to feel guilty for being here. No one's watching you. No one's judging. You did what you had to." "But I'm still a stranger in your house," she said, finally turning to face him. "And I'm not used to people helping without asking for something in return." He looked at her then, not like a billionaire looking at someone beneath him, but like a man who knew pain, who understood what it meant to be alone in a crowded world. "I'm not asking for anything," he said, voice low. "You just reminded me of something I forgot, how to feel like a human being again." She stared at him, unsure whether to believe it, but something about his eyes that they didn't lie. "I want to find the father," David added suddenly. "If he left you and those kids out there, I want him to answer for it." Her face darkened instantly. "Don't." "Why not?" "Because I don't ever want him to find us again." That got David's attention. She stepped back, visibly shaken. "He's not just a deadbeat, David. He's dangerous, controlling. And he doesn't like losing." David's eyes sharpened. Not with fear, no, with something colder. Protective. "Then he won't find you," he said. "Not while you're here." Something shifted in Lila, a tiny crack in her wall, just enough to let a sliver of trust in. 3 days passed. The babies were eating regularly, sleeping better. The color was coming back to their cheeks, and Lila was changing too. Her eyes weren't so sunken, her shoulders weren't so tense. She'd started helping in small ways, folding laundry, washing bottles, tidying the nursery, even though Mia had assured her none of it was expected. David noticed. He noticed everything. He had begun rearranging his schedule just to be at home more. He'd take Zoom calls from his office upstairs instead of spending his day at the downtown headquarters. His staff raised eyebrows, of course. David Sterling had never cancelled a board meeting before, but he didn't care. Not anymore. He was watching something grow under his roof that money could never buy. One evening, while the babies were down and the house was quiet, Lila wandered out onto the back patio. David was there again, like most nights now, nursing. A glass of whiskey and staring at the stars like they owed him answers. She hesitated. He turned before she could speak. "Couldn't sleep either." She shook her head and walked over. "Too quiet sometimes, makes my thoughts louder." He gestured to the chair next to him. "Join the club." She sat, tucking her knees up beneath her sweater. "It still feels unreal." He looked at her carefully. "The mansion?" "No. This. The safety. The peace. Like I'm waiting for someone to knock on the door and take it all away." David didn't speak at first. Then he leaned forward and said, "You know, what's funny? I've had all of this for years. Cars, staff, endless rooms, and I never felt safe either." She turned to him, surprised. "I always thought the more I built, the harder I worked, the more untouchable I'd become," he said. "But truth is I was just hiding behind glass walls, pretending that kept me protected." Lila looked down at her hands. "You're still helping a stranger." He smirked. So are you. I haven't seen my staff this happy in years. Even Mia said she feels like the house is breathing again. She smiled a little at that. He studied her for a moment. You've been through hell, Lila, but you didn't let it break you. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she whispered, I almost did. He looked at her. Really looked. But you didn't. And that's why you're still here. Another silence passed, but it wasn't awkward this time. It felt shared. Suddenly her expression shifted, a flicker of fear. I think he might still be looking, she said. James, the baby's father. He had connections, knew people who knew how to track. David's voice was firm. Then let him try. He's violent, David. So am I when it comes to protecting what matters. That stunned her into silence. Then she asked softly, Why are you doing this for me? He didn't look away. Because I've seen people walk past pain like it's invisible. I've done it myself, and I don't want to be that man anymore. That night, when she returned to her room, she cried, but not out of fear or sadness. It was relief. For the first time in a long time, someone saw her. Not as a problem, not as a burden, just as a woman trying to survive. Meanwhile, David stood at his window, watching the moonlight spill across the floor, and realized something terrifying. He was starting to care. Too much. A week passed and the mansion had transformed. It wasn't just the noise of babies giggling or crying anymore. It was the feeling in the air. Laughter echoing through marble halls. Tiny socks left on stairs. The scent of warm milk and soft lullabies filling corners that had once been hollow. Lila had become part of it. She wasn't just a guest anymore. She was everywhere, calming one baby, feeding another, humming little songs under her breath while folding baby clothes. And David found himself pulled in, more than he expected, more than he was ready for. He was holding Grace one evening, clumsily, bouncing her while walking down the hallway. She stared up at him with big, curious eyes like she was trying to figure him out. Yeah, I don't know what I'm doing either, he muttered, smiling to himself. We're in this together, kid. Lila came out of the nursery doorway with a tired smile. You're getting better at that, he raised a brow. You mean she hasn't spit up on me in the last 10 minutes? She likes you, Lila said softly. They all do. Something in her tone made him pause. It wasn't flirty. It wasn't light. It was real. They like you too, he said. More than they've ever known, I bet. Lila looked away quickly. Don't say that. Why not? Because I can't get used to this. To you, to this life, I'll start believing it's real. It is real, but it's not mine, David. Her voice trembled. I'm just a woman who got lucky you happened to walk into a park that day. One day this will end and I'll be back out there with nothing. I have no family, no money, no education past high school. I'm not built for this. David's voice was quiet but firm. You think any of that matters to me? I think it should. He stepped closer, still holding the baby. You know what I see, he said. A woman who survived what most people couldn't. A mother who carried 3 babies on her back and never gave up on them. I see strength, not struggle. And you're wrong, Lila. This life can be yours. Her eyes were glassy, full of a fight she didn't want to keep fighting. People like you don't end up with people like me. He smiled faintly. You're right, they don't. Not usually. But I've never really been like other people. A beat of silence passed. Then another. And then glass shattered downstairs. They froze. David immediately handed Grace to Lila. Stay here. David, lock the nursery. Don't open it unless it's me. Fear rushed into her eyes as she obeyed. David moved fast, his body tense as he descended the grand staircase. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Security alert from the gate system. Breach detected. He was halfway down the hall when he heard footsteps, too calm, too deliberate. Then a voice echoed through the shadows. Well, well, the famous David Sterling. Didn't expect you to play nursemaid. David's blood ran cold. From the darkened corner a man stepped forward. Scruffy, sharp-eyed, arrogant, and worst of all, familiar from the photo Mia had shown him earlier that week. James, the father, David's. Fists clenched. "I thought rats usually stayed in the sewers," he said coolly. James smirked. "Cute. Where is she?" "She's somewhere you'll never be welcome." "I'm her family," James said, his voice turning venomous. "Those kids are mine." "No," David snapped. "You gave that up when you left them to starve in." "A public park." James took a step closer. "You don't know what's yours, Sterling. People like you, rich boys playing savior, you don't last. You throw money at things and think you own people." David didn't move. "You step foot near her again, I'll ruin you. Financially, legally, hell, physically if I have to. Try me." James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You're just a stepping stone. She'll come back to me when the fantasy ends." David's voice dropped lower. "She'd rather live on the streets again than under your shadow." Before James could say another word, security burst in behind him, guns drawn, eyes sharp. David gave the signal. "Remove him." As they dragged James out, kicking and shouting threats, David stood completely still. Upstairs, behind a locked door, Lila held her babies close, heart pounding. She had heard everything, and her world had just shifted again. He was gone. James had been dragged out by security, kicking and screaming like a man who couldn't believe he'd lost control. And David made sure they did more than just toss him out. Restraining orders were filed that same night. Background checks were pulled. Investigators were hired. Every legal and digital route to Lila and the babies was sealed tighter than a vault. But fear doesn't vanish with paperwork. Lila sat in the nursery long after the babies fell asleep, staring at the floor. Her hands trembled, her heart drumming like it didn't know how to stop. She kept replaying James's voice in her head, slick, venomous, full of that threat she remembered too well. David came in quietly. No knock, just presence. She didn't. "Look up." "I heard everything," she whispered. He stepped closer. "I know. You could have been hurt." "I wasn't." She turned to face him. "You don't know what he's capable of." "I know enough now." Her eyes narrowed. "You think you can protect me forever? You think this house, these walls, your money, it's all going to stop a man like James? He doesn't care about the law. He doesn't care about consequences. If he wants to hurt me, he'll find a way." David didn't respond right away. He walked over to the crib, adjusted Grace's blanket, and stood there for a moment in silence. Then, in a voice lower than before, he said, "You're not alone anymore, Lila." Those words hit something deep in her. "I don't know how to live like that," she confessed, "not depending on someone, not trusting. I've had to survive by myself for so long, it feels wrong to lean." David turned to her, his gaze softer than it had ever been. "Leaning isn't weakness. It's human." She looked down at her lap. "He used to say I was nothing without him, that no one would want a girl like me. A broke single mom with baggage." David stepped closer. "He said that to keep you under his thumb. Because he was. Afraid of what you could become without him." Her throat tightened. "And what am I now, David?" He looked at her like the answer had always been obvious. "You're a mother, a fighter, and the strongest woman I've ever met." The words wrapped around her like a blanket. Not forced, not fake, just truth, spoken without strings. She stood slowly, her arms still folded like armor. "This can't last, you know." "What?" "This, us, this safe little bubble. Reality's waiting just outside the gate." David reached out gently and placed a hand over hers. "Then we build a better reality, one where you don't have to keep running." Her breath hitched. "Why are you doing this for me?" He hesitated, then said what he hadn't dared admit until now. "Because I think the moment I found you in that park, my life stopped being about me." A pause. "You and those babies. You brought life into a place I didn't realize was dead." Lila blinked back tears. "And if I leave?" He looked her straight in the eye. "I'll never stop making sure you're okay." She couldn't hold back anymore. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him. It wasn't romantic, it was desperate, grateful, raw. He held her just as tightly, and for the first time in years she didn't feel small. She felt safe. 3 more weeks passed. The mansion didn't just feel different, it was different. Warmth had moved in, slowly replacing the sterile silence. David found himself rearranging meetings around nap schedules. He learned to hold a bottle in one hand while replying to emails with the other. And he never imagined that changing a diaper, badly, at first, could make him laugh out loud. Lila had started smiling more, a real smile, one that reached her eyes. She cooked sometimes, even though the mansion had a chef. She folded laundry while humming, danced in the hallway with Grace on her hip, and didn't flinch anymore when footsteps echoed behind her. She was healing bit by bit. One evening, after all 3 babies had finally fallen asleep, David and Lila sat on the back patio again. It had become their spot. He poured her a glass of wine, and for once she accepted it. She was wearing a soft dress Mia had bought for her. Simple, elegant, and she wore it like she didn't even know how stunning. She looked. David, on the other hand, couldn't stop looking. "I used to hate silence," she said, sipping slowly. "When I was with James, silence always came before something bad." David leaned back. "And now?" "Now. I think I finally get what peace sounds like." They both watched the sky as stars began to appear. "You ever think about the future?" he asked gently. Lila hesitated. "Sometimes, but I try not to. The moment I plan something, life rips it away." David's voice lowered. "What if I told you the future doesn't have to hurt?" She turned to him, brows furrowed. "I don't want to scare you, Lila," he said, "and I'm not trying to push anything, but I think I want you to stay. For good." She stared at him, frozen. "I don't mean trapped here," he added quickly. "I mean, I want this to be your home. I want those babies to grow up with more than safety. I want them to have love, stability, a real shot, and maybe someday we build something more." Lila shook her head slowly, not because she was saying no, but because it felt too unreal. "You don't know what you're asking. I come with weight, David, years of it." He smiled faintly. "I've carried heavier, and I want to carry this with you." Tears slipped down her cheek before she could stop them. "No one's ever wanted me like this. Just me. Not the version I pretended to be to survive." David reached out, brushing her cheek gently. "I want the real you. The strong, stubborn, brave woman who didn't let life break her." A long pause, and then she whispered, "I'm scared." He nodded. "So am I." And just like that, she leaned in and kissed him. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't movie smooth or planned. It was hesitant and trembling, with years of pain behind it, but it was real, and it meant everything. That night they didn't talk about James or the past, or what could go wrong. They talked about names for the baby's first birthday. They laughed about Grace's obsession with bananas. They imagined a future. Together. And somewhere between conversation and silence, the mansion stopped feeling like a shelter, and finally started feeling like a home. But peace, as always, was never permanent, because the next morning David opened his front door and found a manila envelope taped to the wall. Inside was a photo of Lila, a photo from the night. James had first found her, and written on it in red marker were 4 chilling words: "She still belongs to me." David stared at the photo in his hands, the words scrawled across it burning into his mind like fire. "She still belongs to me." He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood in the doorway as the morning breeze brushed against his face, and something cold, dark, and violent stirred inside him. This wasn't over, and James was making sure he knew it. By the time Lila came downstairs, David had already called in 2 security firms. The house was now under full lockdown, motion sensors rechecked, entry points sealed tighter, private guards positioned at the gates, with rotating surveillance that would make the Secret Service proud. Lila found him in his office, phone in, one hand the photo lying face down on his desk. "David?" she asked carefully. He looked up. She could tell instantly. Something had changed. What happened? He didn't lie. He never lied to her. He handed her the envelope. She stared at it. Her fingers trembled as she read the message, then read it again. Her breath grew shallow. She sank into the chair across from him, her face pale. "I told you," she whispered. "He doesn't give up." David came around the desk, knelt beside her, and took her hands in his. "He won't touch you. He won't get close. I'll make sure of it. You don't know him like I do, David. He's not loud when he attacks. He waits. He poisons the air around you, makes people doubt you, breaks your confidence before he breaks your bones." David's jaw flexed. "Then I'll take away every tool he has." She looked at him, truly looked. "Why are you fighting so hard for me?" His eyes held hers. "Because you gave me something I didn't know I needed," he said. "Family, purpose, something real. I'm not just doing this to protect you, Lila. I'm doing this because I need you safe." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "But what if I'm the danger to you?" "You're not. I bring chaos. A man like him, he doesn't go down easy. Then we make sure he does go down." That afternoon, David made a call, not to a lawyer, but to a contact in a very different circle. A man who didn't ask questions but made problems disappear. David gave him the address James had last used, then wired a 7-figure sum to an untraceable account. By the end of the day, James wasn't a threat anymore. No press releases. No police involvement, just silence. It was the kind of silence that scared people like James, because it meant he was up against something much bigger than himself. He was being hunted now. 3 days later, the envelope was gone. No new messages. No signs. Just the calm that comes when predators realize they've picked the wrong prey. Lila didn't ask for details. She didn't need to. The storm had passed and David was still there, holding her hand through the quiet. One evening, as they sat in the nursery watching the triplets crawl and babble, Lila looked over at him. "Do you still want us here?" she asked softly. David glanced at the babies, then at her. "No," he said, voice steady. "I don't just want you here. I need you here. You belong here." She took his hand, fingers lacing through his. And for the first time in her life, Lila believed it. They didn't rush things. They didn't force love into boxes or timelines. But day by day, step by step, they built something. The babies first. Words were spoken in this house, their first steps taken across its floors. Lila's laughter became the mansion's music. And David learned to live again, to love, to protect not just his company, but his family. They got married a year later, small ceremony, just the 5 of them. And when people asked David Sterling why he'd disappeared from the spotlight, why he'd gone quiet, why he'd stopped attending galas and chasing acquisitions, he always gave the same answer with a soft smile. "Because I found something worth more than all of that."